Welcome to Stribling's New York. I'm your host, Rob Taub on AM 970 The Answer. We are right here on your digital dial as well as simulcast on your favorite handheld device or computer. Stribling's New York is a show about business, culture, and people, and we have a wide range of guests from authors, producers, actors, artists, comedians, restaurateurs. It's a laundry list of wonderful people, and today we have a really interesting group on. My guests are all in the studio today. First one will be Sandra Navidi, who has written a really great book called SuperHubs, and then she'll be followed by comedian Scott Blakeman along with sports writer Scott Mandel discussing, as my grandmother would like to say, Michigas. But sitting across from me right now in the studio is an author, a best-selling author, as are all of our authors on this show, international bestseller, let's say. Sandra Navidi, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Rob. Delighted to be here.
So I've been reading SuperHubs. I read it, and I like the description is a rare behind-the-scenes look at how the world's most powerful titans, the SuperHubs, pull the levers of our global financial system. Geez, my announcing is getting worse. And I just found it really readable and a page-turner. And you walk me through places like Davos. You've met Vladimir Putin and disarmed him by speaking German to him. I love the book.
Well, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to hear that. I spent almost 5 years on it, and I tried to make a very abstract subject, the financial world, relatable.
Well, that's a key thing. You know, it is very relatable. Whether they have their own planes and billions of dollars, as I found as a journalist and interviewer and person about town, that they're all regular people. You might not get along with your plumber or electrician, or you might get along famously with them, and it's going to be the same thing with a titan of industry or even a political leader. And it's often surprising, but you've had some great encounters, and I like the way you walk me through Davos, because most people don't know much about it, and what you read is dry and boring normally, but you talked about, where you stayed and how hotels were delegated. Tell me a little bit more about what it was like to go there for the first time.
It's quite overwhelming because it's a small Swiss ski resort. It's not a luxury resort. It's actually quite basic. And then it's very hard to get there. It's a cumbersome travel. And once you're there, you're surrounded by the most famous people from all over the world. It's a group of roughly 2,000 people. And from all sorts of industries, it's big CEOs, bank CEOs, corporate CEOs, it's academics, it's Bill Gates. I mean, it's just everybody you can imagine. It's like as if you stepped into primetime news and all of a sudden you're in the midst of it. It's quite overwhelming. And even famous people tell me when they went there the first time, they were a little bit taken aback. And then it's 4 days, and it's just really intense, but it's also very enriching because you meet very interesting people, and the exchanges that you have with them is so-called cross-siloed. So you learn about different people in different industries, so lots of new things.
Well, I'm jumping ahead of ourselves, but do you want to explain exactly what did you create the name SuperHub?
No, I explain the financial world with the help of network theory. And network theory mathematically substantiates how networks function and how they behave. And everything around us consists of networks. We ourselves are a network. Our brain is a network, or, the universe. And so I take this methodology to give the explanation of the financial world a little more structure because it's very amorphous and complex. And so I try to I can't say it any other way, give it structure with network theory. And network theory has gained popularity with the whole social networks. People have become more interested in it.
Well, I'm hearkening back to something, and I didn't even make notes about this. It's from the depths of my brain and my memory palace. When I was working for Time magazine, and this is maybe 1984, this was before there were really any Davos-like conferences, and the big salaries didn't exist then. Maybe the highest paid person, and it created such a brouhaha, and you mentioned him in your book, was Michael Milken. So I think he got a paycheck one year for $525 million. In fact, I got to digress for a second and tell you a great Milken story. I tend to do this. I get a little tangential, but I was just reminded of this. The year that Milken made all that money, and I can mention the name now because he's sadly passed away, the number one bond salesman at Drexel was somebody named Bob Dahl, Robert F. Dahl. And he had an unbelievable year selling bonds, and it was in the early 80s, and he had a meeting with Milken, and Milken said, you're getting a $10 million bonus this year. And Bob Dahl said, well, that's great, Mike, but I think I deserve a lot more based on the amount of bonds I've sold. And Milken said, this is before Milken's salary had been announced, he said, hey, if you get any more than $10 million, you'll be making more money than I do. So we had a Fortune 500 Chief Executive Officer conference in San Francisco at the Fairmont Hotel. And I was probably too young to realize how wowed I should have been. If I was there now at the age of 61, it would have been staggering. So I've always wanted to go to Davos, and no one has yet to invite me, but perhaps next year.
Well, the thing is that one dynamic of network theory is power loss. It's also called the rich get richer phenomenon, which coincidentally seems to fit the financial world particularly well. But this issue of exorbitant salaries has become more extreme over the last few decades. So when you probably were at the conference, it wasn't as extreme and as bad as it is now.
No, in fact, okay, so let's say this was early 80s. Editor-in-chief of Time Incorporated was making $500,000 a year. Maybe not even that. And probably the president was then too. A lot of money back then, but comparatively to today's salaries at 20, 30 million a year for people, that was nothing. That's today's lunch money. And people tended to fly commercial then more than now. I mean, any corporate titan is going to be flying private. How does all of this money change things compared to 30 years ago?
Well, it's I would say one of the points of my book is that due to network dynamics, our system has become more extreme and more skewed, and that the SuperHubs, the people in charge, have disabled corrective mechanisms, which eventually in every system kick in to make a system more balanced again. And the imbalance that we're currently seeing is the result of everything that's happened in the past decades, and now seems to be escalating here in the U.S. politically, but also in Europe with Brexit and the impending elections. And so I would say that due to globalization and technical progress, this dynamic has gained steam and has become more extreme. And so that's why people, especially the SuperHubs in the financial world, through the revolving door in the U.S. and Washington, going back and forth in the political world, we're seeing it par excellence right now with Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees. They are just in an ideal position to perpetuate their interests.
Well, you can compare the same thing with the media in terms of a lot of the people we're getting our news from are incredibly high paid and are never going to leave a television studio. So how are they really journalists? I don't think so. Where are they getting their stories from? From press agents sending them press releases saying, hey, you should learn about this or meet this person or interview this person. So that's been altered as well. So there's kind of an elitism now across the board. And I guess it is the natural stages and phases of capitalism. That's what Sam Walton once said anyway, as his empire grew.
Yes, actually, there's a term for this that's called the superstar economy, and Sherwin Rosen several decades ago created this concept and basically saying, actually at the time, he said due to globalization and increased exposure of a few globally, that their salaries would increase. And because you mentioned the media world, look at Megyn Kelly, for instance, with her 10 million plus salary. Is she really worth that much more? Is she that much of a better journalist than other ones? But she does have exposure. She reaches people, and that's the value.
Yeah, I'm of a certain age now that I mentioned, and I didn't even know. I'm not sure what they even call it now. I forgot already. It's something that measures how well known you are on Twitter. I mean, I have 10,285 Twitter followers. I checked earlier, but there are people now that are influencers that get money for mentioning something on Twitter. So the entire world is changing dramatically and drastically. I'm going to apologize for my tangential style here, but I'm looking at my notes, and another thing that really struck me, and because we're talking about people living in a bubble, you mentioned Citaris Fitness. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Citaris, yes.
Citaris. So this is where all of the super rich go to work out. I didn't know they had their own special gym. I want to hear about this.
Well, Citaris was started by a guy who's really good at networking, and also that's part of the book because I need to explain how these people managed to become so well connected and move to the center of the very financial network. And John, the owner of the gym, had just really good social skills and attracted a couple of people from Wall Street who felt comfortable there. He catered to their needs, and so they brought in their friends and they helped him business-wise. And so it's a small community of, Paul Volcker works out there. So some really high-profile names. But it underscores the point that I'm making in the book about homophily. Like attracts like. People feel most comfortable with people who are like them, and they get along with them the easiest. While we might think people who are different from us are more interesting, it's just easier to get along with people who are like us. And that's another issue in network theory as to why this whole superhub culture self-perpetuates, because if you're not from the same socioeconomic background or have the same experiences or the same schooling or social circle, it's very hard to get, up to into these circles.
So then you also mentioned the Four Seasons restaurant, which is no longer with us, but another clubby environment.
Yes, it's just the Four Seasons has been the place for power lunch on Park Avenue. It's centrally located. Actually, the area around Park Avenue is more Wall Street almost than Wall Street because many financial firms are there and the CEOs go there. Henry Kissinger has gone there forever. It's got a long state history, and people just feel comfortable when you're there. That's another place that's sort of surreal when you used to walk in there. There used to be so many famous faces, and people get up and greet each other. So it's not really a club, but it feels like a club.
It's very clubby. I mean,
yes.
I'm going to give a plug since we haven't had a commercial yet. We're listening to AM 970 Radio, The Answer. I'm Rob Taub, Striblings, New York, and I'm here with internationally best-selling author Sandra Navidi, and I'm going to talk about Volare, which I really recommend that everybody eat at. Talk about a clubby place. It's loaded with journalists. John Sexton, the former president of NYU, is always there. And cousin Bruce Morrow from Sirius Radio. And Alan Colmes, one of my old Fox colleagues, lives right across the street. I'm not going to give you the address. So, Sandra, we've talked about, I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but I just made some key notes that stuff that really struck me from your book, because you had like Zelig-like appearances everywhere, and you stumbled upon Vladimir Putin, and I like the way you described he had a phalanx of people around him in an actual circle moving with him. What was that like? And tell us where you met him.
It was sort of surreal. It was in Davos, and I received an invitation, and I went there out of curiosity because I had no business with Russia, still don't. And once you entered the hotel, it was like as if you had stepped foot into Russia immediately. Everybody looked Russian. They refused to speak English and only spoke Russian. And so there was Vladimir Putin, and everybody really sort of catered to him. He was visually alone, the center of the room, and all these bigwig CEOs were, trying to talk to him. And I was one of very few women, and I was walking with this group around Vladimir, and then I kind of lost my patience because I thought, I'm never going to break into this. So I put my foot in front of him and said, now it's ladies' turn. And he looked at me, and I was a little shell-shocked, and I thought I should come up with a joke or something. So I tried to gain a little bit of an advantage by speaking to German to him, gain a surprise momentum. And to my surprise, he responded immediately in native-like German, so I was taken aback a little. It wasn't a comfortable encounter. It was certainly very interesting, but as I say in the book, I pulled another CEO who was standing slightly behind me, in front of me, and said, Dr. Kleinfeld wanted to talk to you, and then I hightailed my way out of there. So one of those experiences you could only have in Davos.
Yeah, and he didn't ask to try on a watch or a ring from you?
No.
So that's my favorite Putin story, is the Super Bowl rig with Robert Kraft. So now tell us a little bit about your background as well, because you've got a great CV.
I'm a lawyer. I'm from Germany. My heritage is German-Iranian, and I'm admitted to practice law in Germany and in the U.S. And I think that also gave me a good perspective, first of all, the transatlantic perspective, and then also from a legal point of view. I've always worked in finance. I started out with Deloitte in Germany. I advised big institutional investors on complex financial products, many of which imploded in the crisis. So I always wondered how it was possible that Americans had such a high living standard and how they financed it. And I never quite understood it until I worked in structured products. I hadn't figured it quite out, but just before the crisis, when I met Nouriel Roubini, also I became aware of his writings.
I've met him at the SALT conference many times.
Yeah, he's great, and he had great. He was very prescient.
Does he call himself Dr. Doom?
No, he gets called that.
he gets called Dr. Doom. Okay, I used to do an imitation of him. This is Nouriel Roubini. I tell you, everything is going to be terrible. How was that? Does it sound like him at all?
A little bit.
Okay. And what led you to write the book? Because you're obviously very, very knowledgeable about finance, and you speak incredibly well, and yet you write in this really wonderfully conversational style. So a layperson, which is a euphemism for idiot like me, can read the book, and I feel like I'm there. You really put me in Davos. It's like, when I get Lee Child on this show or Robert Crace, and they're these famous mystery writers, and I tell them I feel like I'm in Elvis Cole's Corvette. Well, I really feel like I was trudging through the snow with you in Davos, and you're a very good writer.
Nothing could make me happier than you saying that, because in all honesty, it started out really like I have to write a book and like a thesis, and 5 years ago, and it became a passion project over time, and I really struggled with it. It was my first book. It was rejected twice as too academic. I was told you have to tell it through stories. I had never told stories since college, so I tried so hard, and I put so much heart blood in it that, and I wanted it. At some point, I was told you have to make a decision. Do you want this to be academic and stellar, or do you want it for people to read it? And so I thought, really, it would be kind of frustrating.
Exactly. I'm going to tell you something. Having covered books for so many years at People magazine and interviewed, the Jack Welches of the world and all these CEOs that were writing books, and people would buy these books but never read them. It looks good on a bookshelf, and I always have a test when I'll be in somebody's home and I'll see a book like that. I'll go over and crack it, and it'll open like because it's never been cut before. And it's, yes, I'll buy so and so's book because they're famous or they made me a load of money by buying the stock for the company, but it's. Well, they're often ghost-written too, but there's nothing academic about SuperHubs, which I'm urging everybody to get. Now, tell us where to buy it too. Amazon, I imagine, Barnes & Noble. Is it at our favorite bookstores and online accessible?
Everywhere worldwide. In English, in German, it's been a bestseller for over a year, and it's been sold in many different languages: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, and so forth.
Do you have a website?
I do. BeyondGlobal.com.
All right, BeyondGlobal.com, Sandra Navidi. You're a really great writer. So you got another book you're going to write after this now that I've told you how good you are?
Thank you so much. I'm conceptualizing the second one right now.
All right. Well, I really heartily endorse this book. And, the only thing I've really read about Davos would be on page 6 about our mutual friend Anthony Scaramucci having his wine party. Anthony has been a guest on the show many times. So now I really know what Davos is like, and I'm going to make it there next year and cover it journalistically, I hope. Thanks so much for joining us, Sandra.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, Rob.